as we see the fight continue to intensify. One thing that we've seen as a theme for the Biden administration has been reuniting the U.S. with some of its allies, at least when it comes to international strategy. Emily, do we have a sense of what President Biden has had in terms of communication with other leaders and how they unify approaches to the situation? The U.S. has been working with Egypt as well as other players in the area to try and bring about a ceasefire, but the U.S. has also recently come under condemnation. I mean, it's part of the United Nations Security Council. The Security Council has now met 3 times on the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, and they have yet to put out a joint statement because the U.S. has not agreed to it. It has to be unanimous. And so you started to see other countries' officials at the UN, including the Chinese official, come out and really begin to criticize the U.S. for holding up progress here in calling for peace in the Middle East area. All right, Emily, other than a proclamation, what are the potential implications? What could the U.S. potentially do with respect to taking action in a situation in the Middle East that could be a likely outcome of the fighting that we've seen?
I mean, there is a lot that President Biden can do to sort of reverse some of the policies that were implemented under former President Trump. I mean, one thing that happened under President Trump is that there was no longer any foreign aid given to the Palestinians. President Biden has gone ahead and reinstated that. I think a lot of this is also going to see what Congress winds up doing this week. They didn't really act on this issue a lot in the previous week, but they're still here, they're still in town, and there still is a sense that maybe they could wind up doing something as far as funding goes, or even, I know it doesn't have a ton of weight, but having some sort of resolution coming out and really firmly stating where the U.S. Congress is at this point.
Emily, just quickly, the President's first trip aboard as the President of the United States, the first overseas trip, is next month, is Europe. As things stand right now, where is the emphasis for that trip?
I think the emphasis is once again on rebuilding those allies, strengthening those connections with countries abroad, particularly after former President Trump really sort of pulled back on a number of them. So President Biden is hoping to increase his allies in Europe, and that way he can sort of better take on countries such as China, who he sees as a bigger threat.
Emily Wilkins there of Bloomberg Government, thank you. And of course, a little bit earlier on this morning, the headline that the EU and the US announcing a temporary tariff truce in the metals dispute. Maybe just cleaning house a little bit, Lisa, going into this meeting next month.
With this whole issue, and we're just going back to the whole issue within the Middle East, highlights to me some of the fissures within the Democratic Party. The fact that some within the Biden administration are actually pushing back on the fact that he hasn't acted quickly enough, and it really raises the conundrum of how much of the fiscal plan that he announced could get passed, given some of these limitations on consensus.
Yeah, some of the stories down in Washington, D.C. as this administration faces its first big foreign policy test. From New York City this morning, good morning. Alongside Lisa Abramowitz, I'm Jonathan Ferro. Your S&P 500 of 41.51 and down 0.4% now. Yields creeping just a little bit higher at 163.52. And Discovery absolutely flying in a deal with AT&T. This is Bloomberg.
out Monday morning with a little bit of deal flow. We'll talk about that deal flow in just a moment. From New York, this is Bloomberg Surveillance live on TV and radio, and here's the price action this Monday morning. The S&P 500 coming off the back of a week of losses. We take more weight off the S&P, down 0.4%. The Russell down 0.8%. The Nasdaq down 0.4%. And it's a struggle, some tension between how we want the world to be versus how it is. Some tension, I've called it a duration mismatch between our vaccine-fueled desires and just the basic mechanics of getting supply to meet them. Maybe that's why we've seen downside surprises to output and upside surprises to inflation, reflecting that supply-demand mismatch right now. In the bond market, it's meant one thing: a volatile move through last week, just a story of two halves, and back down to basically the average of the last couple of months. Since we've closed at 174 at the back end of March on a US 10-year, on a closing basis, your low's been 154, and your average been 162, 163.35. Pretty much at the average. Yields this morning just inching a little bit higher on 30s to 234.59. I used the word inching on treasuries. I will not use that word for Italy. Let's finish on this. The Italian bond market, the German bond market, yields have been creeping higher in Germany back towards zero. We're negative about 11 basis points on a 10-year, and on the session, we're up a couple of basis points today. In Italy, we're climbing now for a fifth straight session. Earlier this year, in February, we were south of 50 basis points on an Italian 10-year, and now we are through 1% to 1.137%, and yields are up another 7 basis points. If I was looking at the sovereign debt market right now, that's where I'd be laser focused going into next month for the ECB meeting. An Italian 10-year at 1.7%. That's the cross-asset story. Stateside, there is only one story this morning, Romain Bostic. We got a deal.
Yeah, absolutely. AT&T, Discovery, the whole spinoff here. If the folks over at Warner Media want an idea to put on their streaming platform, they can maybe do a docuseries about all the iterations that Warner Media has been through. You go back to the old Ted Turner days in the 1990s. Of course, you have the big AOL deal at the turn of the century. You, of course, remember a few years back, you had that whole bidding war that Rupert Murdoch, when he was trying to gain control of this. And then, of course, the purchase by AT&T of these Warner Media assets in 2016. A new CEO for AT&T in 2020. Stankey coming in, taking a look at that and saying, look, if you're not number one or number two in an industry, get out. And right now, they were not even number three, barely even number four. And in fact, their wireless business that AT&T has was slipping from the top position down to the number three position. They had a big decision here. Do you focus on one thing, wireless and 5G, or do you try to maintain this sort of combination of all of these different assets? The solution, of course, get rid of Warner Media, spin it off into a new company. The head of Discovery Media, he's going to be heading this company when it's all done. Right now, Discovery shares halted. They were up about 17% here in the pre-market, set to reopen around 740. I'm told AT&T shares higher by about 4%. And Viacom CBS, of course, which has its own streaming platform, and a lot of speculation around where that's going to go, up about 3% here in the pre-market as well. We should also point out Viacom shares getting a little bit of a boost off the latest 13F filings that showed Soros Capital and a few other big funds taking a stake in there. There is another big story out there today, and of course it's crypto, John. We had, of course, all the rumblings over the weekend. A one-word tweet by Elon Musk, once again sort of upending the market, down about 10%.